My name is Camille, and at 33 years old, I found myself sitting across from my husband, his pregnant mistress, and my wealthy in-laws in a cold Chicago boardroom. Hours after I signed those divorce papers and took my two children on a first-class flight to Scotland, my ex-husband's entire family packed into a luxury maternity clinic to celebrate his mistress's ultrasound. They thought they had finally secured their perfect heir. They had no idea the doctor was about to deliver a medical impossibility that would unravel their bloodline and expose the devastating financial ruin I had meticulously orchestrated before walking away. If you are watching this from somewhere where family betrayal hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled what came next. The conference room at the high-end Chicago law firm was deliberately designed to intimidate. The walls were paneled in dark, heavy mahogany that seemed to absorb the light, and the massive table stretching between us felt like a physical representation of the massive divide between my world and the Davenport empire. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Across from me sat a united front of absolute betrayal. There was my husband Harrison, 35 years old, and wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. Sitting practically in his lap was Chelsea. She was 26, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a smug expression that she did not even try to hide. Flanking them like protective gargoyles were Harrison's parents, Charles and Catherine Davenport. For 8 long years, I had endured the suffocating weight of the Davenport name. They were the kind of aristocratic old money family that viewed anyone outside their tax bracket as a different species entirely. From the day Harrison brought me home, a working-class forensic accountant from the suburbs, they made it abundantly clear that I was an unwelcome stain on their pristine family portrait. Today was supposed to be their ultimate victory. Today was the day they finally purged me from their elite ranks. The air in the room was thick with tension, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, counting down the final moments of my marriage. Charles Davenport leaned forward, his expensive cologne wafting across the polished table. He picked up a thick stack of legal documents and aggressively slid them across the smooth mahogany surface. The papers came to a stop just inches from my folded hands. "Take your modest settlement and return to the suburbs," Camille Charles stated, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "We are offering you exactly what you deserve, which is more than generous considering the circumstances. The Davenport legacy requires a woman who understands our pedigree. You never did. You never understood the weight of the name you were given. It is time for you to pack up your things and go back to the mediocre life you came from." I looked down at the thick stack of paper. The settlement was indeed modest, practically insulting, given the vast wealth the Davenport investment firm purportedly controlled. They were offering me a small lump sum enough to buy a standard house in a middle-class neighborhood and a minimal amount of child support. They expected me to fight. They expected me to cry, to scream, to demand the primary Chicago estate or the luxury cars sitting in the garage. They wanted a dramatic show. They wanted to watch the desperate suburban wife beg for her place in their kingdom. I did none of those things. I simply kept my breathing even and my expression perfectly neutral. I focused on the steady rhythm of my own pulse, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Every insult they hurled and every condescending glance they shared only solidified the resolve that had been quietly building inside me for months. Catherine, my mother-in-law, let out a sharp, derisive sigh. "Do not drag this out, Camille." She adjusted the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. "Harrison has finally found someone suitable. Someone who understands what it means to be part of this family. We are trying to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can all move on with our lives." I shifted my gaze to Harrison. The man I had loved, the man I had sacrificed everything for, would not even look me in the eye. Instead, he reached over and placed his hand gently on Chelsea's slightly rounded belly. Chelsea beamed, placing her hand over his, painting a picture of absolute domestic bliss right in front of the woman he was discarding. We are finally going to have a true heir, Harrison announced, his voice puffed up with a repulsive kind of pride. He puffed his chest out, completely ignoring the fact that we had 2 children together, a real Davenport. Chelsea and I are focused on the future now. We are building a legacy that actually matters. The cruelty of his words hit me, but I did not let it show on my face. A true heir. The implication was clear, and it was a knife aimed directly at my heart. Harrison and I had 2 beautiful children. Leo was 7 years old, a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved reading about dinosaurs and space. Sophie was 5, a bright, energetic girl with a laugh that could light up a room. But to the Davenports, my children were not true heirs. They were tainted by my ordinary blood. From the moment Leo was born, Charles and Catherine had treated him with polite indifference. They never showed up for his school plays or his soccer games. When Sophie arrived, the indifference turned into active disdain. Catherine would frequently comment on how my children lacked the Davenport refinement. She would complain that Leo was too soft and that Sophie was too loud. At family galas, my children were often rushed off to the kitchen to eat with the staff kept out of sight so they would not embarrass the family in front of the board members and socialites. They are just so ordinary, Catherine had once whispered to a friend at a charity dinner, completely unaware that I was standing right behind her. You look at them and you just see the suburbs. There is nothing exceptional about them. No Davenport ambition. Now Harrison was repeating that same toxic narrative. He was looking at his pregnant mistress as if she were carrying royalty while casually erasing the existence of his actual son and daughter. He was acting as if Leo and Sophie were mistakes to be swept under the rug, failed experiments that did not live up to the family standard. Chelsea let out a soft, breathy laugh and leaned her head against Harrison's shoulder. We already have the nursery planned out, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We are hiring the best interior designer in Chicago. Harrison wants everything to be perfect for the baby. He says this child is going to inherit the entire empire, so we have to start preparing early. She looked directly at me, then her eyes sparkling with malicious triumph. It must be so hard for you, Camille. She offered a pout that was entirely fake. Knowing that your kids will never really be part of all this. But you know it is probably for the best. They will be much more comfortable growing up in a normal neighborhood with normal people. This world is just too overwhelming for them. I let her words hang in the heavy air of the conference room. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single tear fall. I just looked at the 4 of them, taking in their arrogance, their cruelty, and their absolute certainty that they had won. They sat there in their expensive clothes in their expensive boardroom, believing they held all the power. They believed they were crushing me. They believed they were sending the pathetic, unwanted wife away, with nothing but a few scraps from their table. Charles tapped his gold pen against the mahogany table, breaking the silence. Read the paperwork, Camille. He demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. Have your lawyer look it over if you must, though I assure you it is airtight. We are not negotiating. This is the final offer. Sign it, take your children, and leave us in peace. To them, I was still the quiet accountant wife who knew how to sit still, swallow humiliation, and accept whatever scraps they decided to throw at me. They mistook my composure for fear. They mistook my silence for surrender. That was the fatal error none of them saw coming. Charles nudged a gold-plated pen toward my side of the table. He expected my hands to tremble. He expected a desperate plea to keep the estate in Lincoln Park or the luxury SUVs parked in my driveway. In their minds, I was a woman about to lose her entire identity. They had spent 8 years conditioning me to believe that being a Davenport was the only thing of value I possessed. They waited for the inevitable emotional breakdown. Catherine shifted in her leather chair, preparing to repel my begging. Harrison feigned interest in the Chicago skyline, playing the weary man burdened by his ex-wife's collapse. Chelsea watched with greedy eyes, a self-satisfied smirk dancing on her lips, eager to witness my ultimate humiliation. But the tears never came. The desperate bargaining never materialized. I looked at the gold pen resting on the polished wood. Then I looked up at the 4 of them, meeting each of their gazes one by one with complete clarity. I let the silence stretch, allowing the heavy tension in the room to build until it became almost suffocating for them, not me. And then I smiled. It was not a weak or defensive smile. It was a genuine, radiant expression of profound relief. The kind of smile you get when a crushing weight is finally lifted off your shoulders. I saw the immediate confusion register on Charles' face. His brow furrowed and his fingers stopped tapping the table. Catherine sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing in dark suspicion. This was not the script they had written for me. This was not how the discarded suburban wife was supposed to act. I picked up the gold pen. It felt heavy and cold in my hand, but my grip was secure. I did not hesitate. I did not read the terms again because I already knew exactly what they contained down to the last insulting clause. I pulled the first stack of documents toward me and signed my name. My hand was perfectly steady. The ink flowed across the paper in a smooth, elegant flourish. I flipped to the next page and signed again, then the next. The only sound in the vast boardroom was the crisp rustle of thick paper and the rhythmic scratching of the pen. With every single stroke, I felt a physical tether snapping. I was severing my connection to their toxic expectations, their constant belittling, and their fragile, debt-ridden empire. I was signing away my claim to a life that had never brought me anything but misery and exhaustion. When I reached the final page, I added my signature with a deliberate motion, placing a firm period at the end of my name. I placed the pen down gently next to the stack of paper. Then I brought my left hand up and rested it on the table. The massive diamond engagement ring and matching platinum wedding band caught the bright overhead light. Harrison had picked the ring out himself, or rather his mother had picked it out for him from their preferred private jeweler. It was an ostentatious piece of jewelry designed to show off extreme wealth rather than symbolize actual love or commitment. For 8 years, I had worn it as a heavy, glittering symbol of my imprisonment in their family. I grasped the platinum band and slowly slid it off my finger. The metal felt freezing cold as it passed over my knuckle. I placed the ring directly in the center of the final page, right on top of my freshly written signature. The wet blue ink smeared slightly beneath the sharp edge of the diamond, leaving a permanent physical mark of my departure. "Keep it," I said, my voice quiet but echoing clearly in the silent room. "You can give it to Chelsea. It belongs in a pawn shop anyway." I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my simple black dress. "I am giving you exactly what you asked for, Harrison," I said calmly, looking down at him. "I am signing your papers and walking away. I am leaving your precious legacy completely intact." Charles let out a harsh laugh. He snatched the thick stack of papers from the center of the table, carefully brushing the ring aside, and checked the signatures to ensure everything was properly executed. "Good riddance," he muttered, shaking his head. "I always knew you did not have the stomach for this world. You were a bad investment from the start, Camille." Catherine let out a delicate sigh of relief and leaned back in her chair. "Do not let the door hit you on the way out," she said, her voice dripping with arrogant venom. "Try to maintain some semblance of dignity when you move back to whatever dreary neighborhood you came from. We will send someone to collect the keys tomorrow morning." Chelsea chimed in, leaning her head heavily on Harrison's shoulder. "Do not worry about Harrison, Camille. I will take good care of him, and I will make sure the baby has everything they need. It is time for a real Davenport to inherit the throne." I looked at the four of them one last time. They looked incredibly smug, incredibly proud of themselves. They were practically vibrating with victory, openly reveling in the fact that they had bullied me into a quiet, compliant submission. They thought they had won the war. They thought they had outsmarted the simple suburban accountant. They had absolutely no idea that by signing those papers, I had just legally detached my name from the massive ticking time bomb of their fraudulent investment firm. They had no idea that the trap was perfectly set, the timer was counting down, and they were sitting right in the center of the blast zone. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. My heels clicked steadily against the polished floor, a confident, rhythmic sound that echoed down the quiet hallway. Behind me, I could hear Charles congratulating Harrison and Chelsea, giggling loudly about her upcoming nursery renovations. They were already celebrating their brilliant future. I pushed open the double doors and walked out of the law firm, leaving the Davenports behind me forever. I stepped directly into the empty elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the steel doors slid shut, cutting off the final view of the reception area, I let out a long, deep breath. The suffocating weight of the past 8 years was finally truly gone. I pulled my shoulders back and stood tall now. I did not feel defeated today. I felt entirely invincible, ready for whatever the future held for me. 45 minutes later, the sterile quiet of the law firm was replaced by the chaotic symphony of O'Hare International Airport. I stood near the entrance of the exclusive first-class departure lounge, breathing in the scent of roasted coffee and expensive luggage. The massive glass windows revealed a gloomy Chicago afternoon, with gray clouds heavy with impending rain. It was the perfect backdrop for leaving a life that had been equally gray and oppressive. Beside me stood my two absolute best reasons for breathing. Leo was gripping the handle of his small rolling suitcase with intense concentration. At 7 years old, he took his responsibilities very seriously. Sophie, who was 5, held tightly to my left hand, while using her other hand to clutch a stuffed Highland cow I had given her a week ago. "Are we really going to live in a castle, Mom?" Sophie asked, her voice pitching up with pure excitement. I looked down at her bright eyes and brushed a stray curl behind her ear. "We are going to live in a very big house with plenty of room to run, and a garden that goes on forever," I told her. Leo adjusted his grip on his suitcase and looked up at me. "And there are no fancy dinners where we have to stay in the kitchen, right?" he asked. His question carried a subtle weight that broke my heart just a little bit. He was far too young to have noticed the way his grandparents had hidden him away. I knelt down, so I was right at their eye level. "No more hiding," I promised them, my voice firm and steady. "In Scotland we eat wherever we want. We can run in the halls and we can make as much noise as we please. This is our brand new adventure, and we get to make all our own rules." Sophie bounced on her heels, her stuffed cow bobbing up and down. "I like the new adventure," she declared happily. Leo smiled, a genuine relaxed smile that I had not seen on his face in months. I stood back up and offered my hand to Leo. He took it, and the three of us walked toward the priority security lane. The airline staff greeted us with warm smiles, checking our premium tickets and waving us through the expedited line. As we moved through the sprawling terminal, I felt something I had not felt in years: control. The Davenports would assume I was running away, broken, humiliated, and empty-handed. Let them. The less they understood about my next move, the safer my children would be. All they needed to know was that I had signed the papers, taken the settlement, and disappeared from their world. Everything else could wait until it was far too late for them to stop it. We reached the private first-class lounge, and I settled the kids into oversized leather chairs near a large window. I ordered them hot chocolates and arranged a few new coloring books on the table between them. They were completely absorbed in their activities, oblivious to the massive shift that had just occurred in their lives. I stood a few feet away, watching them with a fierce, protective pride. They were safe. They were wealthy beyond measure thanks to my own hard work. And they would never again be made to feel inferior by people who valued pedigree over basic human decency. I reached into the pocket of my black dress and pulled out my cell phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. There were a few emails from the law firm confirming the receipt of the signed documents. There was a text from the moving company I had hired months ago confirming that my personal belongings had successfully cleared customs in the United Kingdom. And then there were the unread messages from my soon-to-be former in-laws. Catherine had sent a petty text reminding me to drop off the spare keys to the estate. Harrison had sent a brief message telling me to expect a call from his assistant regarding the children's visitation schedule. I stared at the screen, feeling absolutely nothing for the people who had sent those messages. They were ghosts to me now, relics of a past life that I was officially discarding. I did not reply to Catherine. I did not respond to Harrison. Instead, I pressed the power button on the side of the device. The screen prompted me to confirm that I wanted to shut the phone down. I pressed confirm and watched as the screen faded to a deep, impenetrable black. The device felt heavy in my hand. a piece of metal and glass that tethered me to Chicago, to the Davenports, to a version of myself that no longer existed. I walked over to a large silver trash receptacle standing near the lounge exit. I held the phone over the opening for just a brief second. It was the only line of communication the Davenports had for me. It was the only way they could reach me when their entire world started crashing down around them in a few hours. Letting it go meant cutting the cord completely. I opened my fingers and let the phone drop. It hit the bottom of the metal bin with a satisfying thud. I turned away without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. I walked back to my children just as the lounge attendant announced our flight to Edinburgh was ready for priority boarding. Leo looked up from his coloring book and grabbed his rolling suitcase. Sophie finished her hot chocolate and grabbed my hand. "Ready, Mom?" she asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. I looked out the window at the planes lining the tarmac, ready to carry us an ocean away. "Let us go home," I told her. 5,000 miles away, an entirely different kind of scene was unfolding on the top floor of the Montgomery Center for Maternal Excellence in Chicago. Harrison Davenport stood near the head of a state-of-the-art examination bed, feeling a profound sense of triumph. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom suit and looked down at Chelsea. With its velvet seating area, catered refreshment station, and panoramic views of the city skyline, the VIP suite resembled a luxury penthouse. This was exactly the environment a Davenport deserved. The family had turned the ultrasound appointment into a private gala. 7 of them packed the spacious room, treating the clinic with the loud entitlement of people who had never been told no. Charles handed a glass to his wife Catherine, who was busy inspecting the thread count of the hospital blankets. Preston Harrison's older brother lounged on a velvet love seat with his legs crossed, while his wife Juliet scrolled through her phone beside him. Beatrice, the youngest Davenport sibling, was leaning over Chelsea's bed, holding a ring light to ensure the lighting was absolutely perfect for social media. "This is the day our family finally gets back on track," Charles announced, raising his crystal flute. He took a sip of the cider and nodded with immense satisfaction. That meeting at the law firm could not have gone better. I honestly expected Camille to cause a huge scene or demand half the company. Instead, she practically ran out the door. It just proves what I have said all along. She never had the spine for our world. She took her settlement and surrendered without a fight. Harrison smiled, puffing out his chest as he looked around the room. He felt a surge of validation hearing his father speak those words. But today, he had finally won the ultimate victory. He had secured his freedom, kept his wealth, and upgraded to a woman who knew how to play the game. "She knew she was outmatched," Harrison said smoothly, resting his hand on Chelsea's shoulder. Camille is a suburban accountant at heart. The pressure of maintaining the Davenport legacy was always too much for her. Now she can go back to clipping coupons, and we can focus on what actually matters. Catherine walked over to the bed and gently patted Chelsea's hand. "You are glowing, my dear Catherine," said her voice dripping with artificial warmth. A true Davenport mother always glows. I am just so relieved that Harrison has finally found someone who understands the importance of our social standing. Someone who knows how to carry herself in public. We will need to get you into the country club immediately. Chelsea beamed under the praise, soaking up the attention like a sponge. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder and grabbed her phone from the bedside table. "Thank you, Catherine," she said, her voice breathy and sweet. "I am just so honored to be part of this family. Harrison has been absolutely wonderful through this whole pregnancy. I feel like the luckiest woman in the entire world." Beatrice leaned in closer with the ring light. "Okay, the lighting is flawless right now," Beatrice instructed. "Look down at your stomach and smile like you are thinking about a private joke." Harrison put your hand over hers and look at the camera. "We need to capture the exact perfect moment before the doctor comes in. This is going to get so many likes." Harrison dutifully placed his hand over Chelsea's, striking a flawless pose of protective masculine pride. Chelsea tilted her chin down, offering a practiced, serene smile that she had likely spent hours perfecting in the mirror. Beatrice snapped a dozen photos in rapid succession, the artificial shutter sound clicking loudly in the clinic suite. "Let me see them," Chelsea demanded immediately, snatching the phone from Beatrice. She swiped through the images, her eyes darting across the screen as she scrutinized every angle. This one is gorgeous. My skin looks absolutely flawless. I'm going to post it right now. What should the caption be? Something elegant but powerful. Juliet spoke up from the velvet love seat, not looking up from her own phone. Keep it simple and direct, something that establishes your territory. You want everyone in our social circle to know that the transition is official and that Camille is history. Chelsea's eyes lit up with malicious delight. I know exactly what to write. She tapped her manicured nails against the glass screen, typing out the words with eager precision. New beginnings. True family. She read the caption aloud, letting the words hang in the air. It is perfect. It subtly lets everyone know that the previous marriage was just a placeholder. This baby is the absolute real deal. Post it, Harrison agreed, kissing the top of her head. Let the whole city know that the Davenport family is finally expanding the right way. Chelsea pressed the button, sending the image out to her thousands of followers. Almost instantly, the phone began to buzz with incoming likes and comments. She squealed with delight, reading the reactions aloud to the room. The entire family basked in the glow of their manufactured reality. They were completely insulated in their bubble of wealth and privilege, entirely convinced of their own superiority. Preston chuckled loudly from the velvet sofa. I still cannot believe how easy it was to get rid of Camille and those two plain kids. I always felt so awkward bringing clients around when they were at the house. Leo was always hiding in corners reading books about bugs, and Sophie was just loud. They never had any sense of decorum. It is a relief to know the next generation is going to be raised with actual standards. They are safely out of our hair now, Charles declared, waving his hand dismissively. The settlement money will keep her quiet, and if she tries to cause any trouble later, our legal team will bury her in paperwork until she runs out of funds. But knowing Camille, she will just fade into the background where she belongs. She does not have the resources or the intelligence to challenge us. A young nurse entered the room carrying a stack of fresh towels and a tray of medical instruments. She paused in the doorway, clearly taken aback by the loud party-like atmosphere in the clinical space. "Excuse me," the nurse said softly, trying to navigate around Charles and the refreshment cart. "I just need to prep the ultrasound machine for Dr. Sterling. He will be right in to see you." Catherine looked at the nurse with mild annoyance, as if a servant had interrupted a royal banquet. "Well, please be quick about it," Catherine instructed sharply. "And make sure the monitor is turned so we can all see the screen clearly. We want to get a video of the heartbeat for our family archives." The nurse nodded politely, keeping her eyes down as she moved to the side of the bed. She began adjusting the complicated machinery, typing Chelsea's information into the computer terminal. Harrison watched the screen flicker to life, his chest swelling with anticipation. Everything was falling into place exactly as he had planned. He had successfully discarded a wife who made him feel inadequate. He had secured a young, beautiful fiancée who adored him, and he was about to see the first images of his true heir. Chelsea grabbed his hand and squeezed it tightly. "Are you nervous?" she asked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Not at all," Harrison replied smoothly, offering her a reassuring smile. "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Today is the best day we have ever had." The family continued to talk loudly over the soft hum of the medical equipment, completely consumed by their own arrogance. They were a family that believed money could buy reality, that power could rewrite history, and that their actions would never have consequences. They sat in that incredibly luxurious room, taking their endless photos and drinking their expensive sparkling cider, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality hurtling toward them. They were completely unprepared for the fact that the foundation of their entire existence was built on a monumental lie, and the walls of their pristine castle were about to collapse directly on top of them. The heavy oak door to the suite swung open with a quiet whoosh. The sound barely registered over Beatrice complaining about the clinic Wi-Fi password and Preston attempting to order champagne from the concierge. Into this carnival of entitlement walked Dr. Arthur Sterling. He was a man in his late 60s with a firm posture shaped by decades of delivering devastating medical news. Carrying a thick manila folder tucked under his arm, he paused just inside the threshold. His gray eyes swept over the crowded room, taking in the ring light, the velvet love seat, and the sheer volume of bodies crammed into a space meant for intimate medical consultation. Harrison immediately stood a little bit taller, puffing his chest out in a show of dominance. He extended a confident hand toward the specialist. "Dr. Sterling, it is great to see you again today. My father was telling us how you took such excellent care of his business partner last year. We appreciate you making time for us. We are all extremely eager to get a wonderful first look at the newest addition to the Davenport family line." Dr. Sterling accepted the handshake, offering a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "It is my job to make time for my patients, Mr. Davenport," he said, his voice a steady baritone that commanded immediate respect. He moved past Harrison and stepped up to the examination bed. He nodded a greeting to Chelsea, who offered him a camera-ready smile. He placed the thick folder on the rolling cart next to the ultrasound machine. "Let us take a look at how you and the baby are doing today." The crowded room grew noticeably quieter as the doctor finally took his seat on the small rolling stool. Beatrice kept her phone raised, her finger hovering over the record button. Catherine stepped closer to the bed, her hands clasped tightly. Charles crossed his arms, projecting the aura of a king waiting to inspect his domain. Dr. Sterling applied warm gel to Chelsea's abdomen. She let out a theatrical giggle and reached for Harrison's hand. Harrison squeezed her fingers, looking down at her with manufactured devotion. Dr. Sterling pressed the transducer wand against her skin and turned his attention to the large monitor on the wall. Within seconds, the grainy image of a 16-week-old fetus appeared on the screen. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Beatrice began tapping her screen to capture burst photos while Preston leaned over the sofa for a better look. "There is your beautiful baby," Dr. Sterling said quietly, moving the wand with perfectly steady motions. He hit a button on the console, and the rapid swoosh of the fetal heartbeat filled the suite. It was a strong sound that bounced off the walls. Chelsea let out a dramatic sigh and wiped a single, perfectly placed tear from her eye. Harrison beamed, looking around the room at his family to ensure everyone was admiring his achievement. Dr. Sterling continued his work in silence, taking several routine measurements. He noted the crown to rump length, checked the amniotic fluid levels, and confirmed the healthy development of the vital organs. Everything about the pregnancy was progressing exactly as it should. The baby was thriving. The medical data on the screen painted a picture of absolute normalcy. The doctor turned away from the monitor and opened the manila folder he had brought into the room. He flipped past Chelsea's recent intake forms and turned to a section marked with a red tab. It contained the extensive medical history for Harrison Davenport, pulled from the hospital network's centralized database to ensure comprehensive care. Dr. Sterling ran his index finger down a specific page of typed medical notes. His finger stopped. He read a paragraph, then he read it again. The festive energy in the VIP suite began to shift. It was a slow, creeping transition. People notice when a medical professional stares at a piece of paper for too long. Beatrice lowered her phone slightly, her brow furrowing. Catherine unclasped her hands, taking a half step toward the monitor. Even Chelsea seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild confusion. "Is everything all right, doctor?" she asked, her breathy voice suddenly sounding very small in the large room. "Is the baby okay?" Dr. Sterling did not answer immediately. He stared at the frozen ultrasound image on the wall monitor where the tiny, healthy fetus was clearly visible. He looked back down at the file in his lap. The typed medical history was equally clear. Two completely contradictory pieces of scientific data were sitting right in front of him. A layer of thick, uncomfortable tension began to fill the room like rising water, stifling the previous arrogant laughter. The silence became heavy and oppressive. Dr. Sterling slowly closed the manila folder and placed his hands flat on top of it. He looked directly at Harrison. He did not look at Chelsea, Charles, or Catherine. His sharp gray eyes locked onto Harrison with a piercing analytical intensity. The doctor's expression was no longer polite or practiced. It was deadly serious. It was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces physically could not fit together. Harrison shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His confident posture began to crack under the doctor's unwavering scrutiny. "What is it?" Harrison asked, trying to force a casual chuckle that sounded entirely hollow. "You are looking at me like I grew a second head, Doc." The heartbeat sounded great, right? "The baby is healthy." Dr. Sterling took a slow, deliberate breath and flipped a switch on the console. The large monitor on the wall went entirely black, plunging the room into a sudden, shocking absence of light and sound. Chelsea let out a sharp gasp of protest. The rhythmic swoosh of the heartbeat vanished, leaving only the sound of 8 people breathing in a very tense space. "The baby is perfectly healthy," Dr. Sterling said, his baritone voice slicing through the heavy silence. He stood up from his rolling stool. He picked up a cloth and handed it to Chelsea so she could wipe the gel from her stomach. "But I am afraid we have to halt this celebration right now. I need to speak with the parents privately. I must ask the rest of the family to step out into the waiting area immediately." The instruction hung in the air for a long moment. No one moved. The Davenports were not accustomed to being dismissed. They were accustomed to running the room, dictating the terms, and buying their way past standard protocols. To be told to leave a suite they were paying a premium for was completely foreign to them. Charles Davenport recovered from his shock first. His face, previously flushed with the pride of a new heir, darkened with sudden explosive indignation. He stepped directly into the center of the room, placing himself between the examination bed and the door. He threw his shoulders back, puffing out his chest to assert his patriarchal authority. "Absolutely not!" Charles barked, his voice booming across the room. "I do not know what kind of game you think you are playing, Doctor, but no one is leaving this suite. This is my family. We are paying top dollar for this clinic, and we do not do secrets. Whatever you have to say to my son, you can say to me. I am the head of this family, and I demand to hear the news of my grandson right this instant." Dr. Sterling did not flinch. He did not step back. He stood his ground, holding the manila folder tightly against his side. He looked at Charles with a mixture of professional exhaustion and profound warning. "Mr. Davenport, I strongly advise you to respect my request. This is a highly sensitive medical matter regarding your son. It is not appropriate for a group setting. Please take your entire family and step into the hall." Charles did not move a single muscle. Instead, he planted his expensive shoes firmly on the linoleum floor and crossed his arms tighter against his chest. The patriarch of the Davenport family was not a man who took orders from anyone, not even a respected medical professional inside a clinic. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff that echoed loudly in the tense silence of the VIP suite. "I am not going anywhere," Charles stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And neither is my family. We pay a premium for transparency and access, Dr. Sterling. My son is the father of this child, and whatever minor complication you think you have discovered on that screen is something we will handle together. We do not keep secrets in this family. Speak your mind right now, or I will have the clinic administration in this room within 5 minutes to replace you with someone who remembers who signs their paychecks." Dr. Sterling looked at the angry, red-faced billionaire and let out a very slow, heavy sigh. He had spent decades dealing with entitled patients, but the sheer blinding arrogance radiating from Charles Davenport was almost palpable. The doctor shifted his gaze away from the father and directed his attention entirely to the son. Harrison was standing right next to the examination bed, his hand still resting possessively on Chelsea's shoulder. He mirrored his father's arrogant posture, tilting his chin up and offering the doctor a condescending smirk. "You heard my father," Doc Harrison said, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "We are an open book. There is absolutely nothing you could say that would shock us. If Chelsea needs some expensive vitamins or a specialized diet plan for the heir, just write the prescription and send the bill to my office. We are wasting time here, and we have a celebration dinner booked in an hour." Dr. Sterling looked at Harrison with a profound, almost devastating sense of pity. It was the kind of look a seasoned professional reserves for a man who is proudly standing on tracks while a freight train bears down on him. The doctor slowly placed his hands flat on the manila folder, resting on the rolling cart. He did not blink as he prepared to deliver the absolute destruction of the Davenport family's manufactured reality. "Very well. Dr. Sterling said quietly, his baritone voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. If you insist on discussing your private medical history in front of an audience, I will not stop you. But I want the record to show that I strongly advised against this. Harrison let out a short, arrogant laugh. Just spit it out. You are making Chelsea nervous for no reason. Chelsea was indeed looking nervous. She had pulled the hospital blanket up to her chest, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the thin fabric. The bright camera-ready smile she had been wearing just moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by a tight, strained expression. She looked rapidly between Harrison and the doctor, a primal panic beginning to surface in her wide eyes. Dr. Sterling opened the manila folder one last time. He did not need to read the notes. He knew exactly what they said because he was the one who had typed them. He looked directly into Harrison's eyes, holding the younger man's gaze with absolute unwavering certainty. Mr. Davenport, your fiancée is indeed 16 weeks pregnant with a healthy baby. Dr. Sterling began, his voice ringing out clearly in the silent suite. The fetal development is perfectly normal, and the heartbeat we just heard is strong and steady. By all standard obstetric metrics, this is a successful pregnancy. Harrison immediately smiled, turning to look at his father with a triumphant, "See? I told you so," expression. Charles let out a loud breath and uncrossed his arms, preparing to launch into a lecture about dramatic doctors. However, Dr. Sterling continued, cutting through their premature relief like a scalpel. My records show a very specific procedure in your medical file. 3 years ago, you were admitted to this exact hospital network under severe distress. I was the attending specialist who took your case. Harrison's confident smile instantly froze. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I personally performed your bilateral orchiectomy due to your battle with stage 2 cancer. Dr. Sterling stated, his voice completely steady and clinical. The surgery was a necessary life-saving measure to remove the aggressively spreading tumors. As a direct and unavoidable result of that surgical intervention, you are completely sterile. You produce absolutely no sperm. The words hung in the air, heavy and devastating. Therefore, Dr. Sterling concluded, closing the folder with a quiet, definitive snap. It is biologically impossible for you to be the father of the child in that woman's womb. Absolute suffocating silence descended upon the VIP suite. It was a thick, paralyzing vacuum of sound, as if the doctor had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The luxury maternity clinic, with its velvet seating and catered refreshments, suddenly felt like a sterile, brightly lit interrogation chamber. For several agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The Davenport family seemed to be collectively frozen in time, their brains desperately struggling to process the monumental weight of the medical facts that had just been laid bare in front of them. Harrison stood perfectly still beside the examination bed. His hand, which had been resting proudly on Chelsea's shoulder just a minute earlier, slowly slipped away and dropped to his side. He stared at Dr. Sterling with wide, uncomprehending eyes. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The arrogant heir to the Davenport fortune had been reduced to a trembling shell of a man. His mind was furiously trying to reject the information, trying to find a mistake in the data. But he could not. He knew the truth about his own medical history, a truth he had gone to desperate lengths to hide from the people standing in this room. Chelsea pressed her back hard against the elevated head of the hospital bed. Her hands were shaking violently as she pulled the blanket up right under her chin. The illusion of the flawless fiancé was completely gone, replaced by the raw terror of a fraudster caught in the brightest spotlight. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some desperate excuse, but the sheer magnitude of the biological reality made any lie completely useless. She was trapped, and the walls were rapidly closing in. Charles Davenport took a slow, unsteady step backward. The patriarchal authority he had been projecting so fiercely had completely evaporated. He looked at his son, scanning Harrison's pale, terrified face. The older man's mind was racing, trying to connect the devastating timeline. His son had secretly battled cancer. His son had undergone life-altering surgery without telling him. His son was sterile. And the woman sitting on the bed, the woman they had just been celebrating, was carrying a child that belonged to a total stranger. Catherine let out a strange sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. She reached out and grabbed the back of the velvet love seat to steady herself, her knuckles turning bone white. Her pristine world was imploding right in front of her eyes. Beatrice slowly lowered her smartphone, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the device. The social media post celebrating their new beginnings was already gathering hundreds of likes, a permanent record of their absolute humiliation. Harrison slowly turned his head to look down at Chelsea. The shock in his eyes was rapidly morphing into something entirely different. The realization was hitting him with the force of a speeding truck. He had discarded his wife, a woman who had stood by his side through his darkest medical crisis, for a woman who had been actively betraying him. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. The absolute silence that had gripped the VIP suite shattered into a million jagged pieces. Catherine Davenport let out a high-pitched, breathless gasp that sounded like a dying bird. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and her knees completely buckled beneath her. She collapsed in a heap of expensive silk and pearls directly onto the linoleum floor. Beatrice shrieked, dropping her smartphone, completely forgetting about the live social media audience she had been cultivating just moments before. Preston lunged forward to catch his mother, but tripped over the rolling medical stool, sending it crashing into a tray of stainless steel instruments. The loud, metallic clatter echoed through the suite, amplifying the sheer pandemonium. The pristine, unshakable public image the Davenport family had spent decades meticulously crafting was entirely obliterated in a matter of seconds. Charles did not even look down at his unconscious wife. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar as he turned his full wrath onto the young woman cowering on the examination bed. "You lying parasitic fraud!" He roared, his voice rattling the glass of the panoramic windows. "You thought you could trap my son. You thought you could infiltrate this family and steal our legacy with another man's bastard." Chelsea scrambled backward, pushing herself violently against the wall until there was nowhere left to go. Tears of genuine panic began streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her flawless makeup. She raised both hands in a desperate, trembling gesture of defense. "No, please," she stammered, her breathy, sweet voice replaced by a shrill, desperate whine. "It is a medical miracle, Charles. I swear to you, I read about this online. Sometimes bodies heal themselves. It has to be Harrison's baby. I have never been with anyone else. I love him. I love this family." The lie was so pathetic, so utterly devoid of logic that it only fueled the patriarch's absolute fury. "A medical miracle," Charles sneered, stepping closer to the bed and pointing a trembling finger right at her face. "Do you think we are absolute fools? Do you think the Davenport Empire was built by men stupid enough to believe in immaculate conception? You are a cheap gold digger who miscalculated her timeline. You saw an easy target in my son, and you tried to secure a permanent payday." Harrison finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The humiliation burning in his chest was agonizing. He had paraded this woman around Chicago society. He had bragged to his wealthy country club friends about his virility and his beautiful young fiancée. He had sat in a polished boardroom just a few hours ago and cruelly mocked the mother of his actual children while rubbing this woman's stomach. The sheer magnitude of his public humiliation was suffocating. He could actually feel the walls of the clinic closing in on him. "Get out," Harrison said, his voice remarkably low and trembling with a dark, dangerous energy. He took a heavy step toward the hospital bed, pointing a shaking finger toward the heavy oak door. Chelsea let out a loud, dramatic sob, grabbing the edge of his tailored suit jacket. "Baby, please, you have to listen to me," she begged, gripping the expensive wool fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We can figure this out. We can still get married. We can just pretend the doctor is wrong. Absolutely no one else has to know." Harrison violently jerked his arm away, tearing the fabric from her desperate grasp. "I said, get out!" he screamed, his voice breaking under the weight of his own immense foolishness. "Take your fake miracle and get out of this clinic before I have security drag you out by your hair. You are never setting foot in my house again. You are never getting another dime from me. It is completely over." Chelsea looked at his contorted face and realized she had completely lost the gamble. The lavish future she had banked on the expensive nursery, the high society galas, they were all gone. She scrambled off the hospital bed, not even bothering to wipe the sticky ultrasound gel from her exposed stomach. She hastily grabbed her designer handbag from the velvet love seat and sprinted out of the VIP suite, leaving the heavy wooden door swinging wildly in her wake. As the sound of her frantic footsteps faded down the quiet hospital hallway, Harrison stood panting in the center of the ruined celebration. His mother was slowly regaining consciousness on the floor, groaning as Preston helped her sit up against the wall. His father was pacing furiously near the window, muttering vicious curses under his breath. Dr. Sterling stood quietly in the corner, watching the entire wealthy dynasty implode with calm professional detachment. Harrison stared at the empty doorway, and a crushing wave of profound guilt washed over him. He was suddenly overwhelmed by the vivid memory of what had happened 3 years ago. The memory of the loyal woman he had just casually thrown away. 3 years ago, when Dr. Sterling first diagnosed him with stage 2 cancer, Harrison had been absolutely terrified. But his terror was not just about the aggressive disease threatening his life, it was about his father. Charles Davenport despised physical weakness of any kind. A sick heir was a useless heir. Harrison knew that if his father ever found out about the cancer, he would be quietly sidelined, stripped of his executive titles, and replaced by his older brother Preston on the company board. Harrison had begged Camille, his quiet, unassuming wife, to help him hide the illness from his image-obsessed family. And Camille had done exactly that. She became his absolute impenetrable shield. While he pretended to go on extended business trips, Camille drove him to a private out-of-network facility for his aggressive chemotherapy and surgical treatments. Because they could not use the corporate health insurance without alerting company accountants, Camille took on extra freelance consulting work. She spent her nights analyzing complex financial data until her eyes burned just to pay for his off-the-books medical bills. She held his head while he was violently ill in the guest bathroom. She carefully changed his bandages. She kept his agonizing secret while enduring the constant daily insults from his parents, who called her lazy and unmotivated. She saved his physical life and fiercely protected his masculine pride. She asked for nothing in return except his loyalty. And how had he repaid her? He had grown resentful of the fact that she knew his darkest, weakest secret. When he finally recovered, he wanted to erase that terrible period completely. He wanted to feel like an untouchable Davenport again. So he quickly found Chelsea, a young woman who looked at him like a god who knew nothing of his cancer or missing anatomy. He betrayed the only person who had ever truly loved him without condition just to protect his fragile, pathetic ego. The sickening reality of his choices hit him so hard he felt physically nauseous. He had just legally signed away an incredibly brilliant, loyal woman who had sacrificed her own peace for his survival. He had replaced her with a useless parasite who was carrying another man's child. Harrison stumbled backward and sank onto the velvet love seat, burying his pale face in his trembling hands. He stepped over the scattered medical instruments on the floor and grabbed Harrison by the shoulder, gripping the expensive fabric of his suit jacket with bruising force. "Get up," Charles barked, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. "This is not the time to fall apart like a weak child. We have a massive crisis on our hands, and we need to contain the damage before that lying woman runs to the press or tries to drain your accounts." Harrison slowly lowered his hands, looking up at his father with bloodshot eyes. The sheer reality of his monumental mistake was still suffocating him, but the sharp sting of his father's reprimand forced him back into the present moment. Beatrice and Preston stood completely frozen near the large panoramic window. The celebratory atmosphere was completely dead, replaced by the cold, calculating machinery of Davenport Damage Control. Dr. Sterling cleared his throat, picking up his thick manila folder from the rolling cart. "I will leave you to discuss your private family matters," he said quietly, stepping out of the suite and pulling the heavy oak door shut securely behind him. The sharp click of the latch seemed to activate a switch in Charles. He began pacing the length of the room, pointing a stiff, accusing finger at his eldest son. "You are going to cut her off right this second," Charles demanded. "I want her removed from the luxury condo we leased for her in the city. I want all the credit cards canceled immediately. I want the family trust entirely locked down. She is a parasite who thought she could secure a lifetime payday by getting pregnant with some random personal trainer and passing the bastard off as a Davenport heir. We are going to financially starve her out completely before she can even hire a lawyer to fight us." Harrison swallowed hard, feeling a cold knot of genuine panic forming deep in his stomach. The family trust was one thing, but he had made a major independent financial move just 3 days ago. It was a move he had kept entirely secret from his father, wanting to prove that he was capable of managing his own wealth without supervision. "Dad, there is something else you need to know." Harrison stammered, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. Charles stopped pacing instantly and glared at him with dark, furious eyes. "What else did you do, Harrison? I gave her a push present," Harrison admitted, staring down at his expensive leather shoes, unable to meet his father's gaze. "She said it was a common tradition among her friends, and she wanted to feel totally secure before the baby arrived. I transferred $500,000 from the primary investment operating account directly into her personal checking account on Tuesday morning." The silence that followed was absolutely terrifying. Charles' face turned an alarming shade of dark purple. "You did what?" He roared, the sound echoing violently in the enclosed medical space. "You transferred $500,000 of liquid company capital to a young woman you have known for less than a year. Are you entirely out of your mind? That money was specifically supposed to be leveraged for the upcoming commercial real estate acquisition downtown." "I can get it back," Harrison said quickly, standing up from the velvet love seat in a frantic attempt to appease his father. "It was a standard wire transfer, but because of the massive size, I set it on a delayed clearing schedule to ensure it passed the internal corporate fraud checks. The funds have not fully settled in her external banking account yet. If I log in right now, I can cancel the transaction completely and pull the money straight back into the firm." "Then do it," Charles ordered, his voice a lethal, menacing hiss. "Do it right, this exact moment. I want every single cent returned to the Davenport ledger before she figures out how to access it. Move." Harrison rushed past his parents and siblings, throwing open the clinic door and practically sprinting down the quiet hospital hallway toward the private VIP waiting room they had reserved for the afternoon. He had left his leather business briefcase sitting on one of the expensive leather sofas near the catered coffee station. His hands were shaking so badly he violently struggled with the brass clasps on the briefcase, fumbling the combination locks twice before finally snapping them wide open. He pulled out his sleek silver laptop and dropped down heavily onto the edge of the sofa. Charles and the rest of the shocked family trailed quickly behind him, filing into the waiting room with grim, terrified expressions. Catherine slumped into an armchair, rubbing her temples in distress, while Preston peered anxiously over his brother's shoulder. The entire family was holding their collective breath, relying entirely on the digital banking portal to save them from a massive, irrecoverable financial embarrassment. Harrison flipped the laptop open and hit the power button. The screen illuminated his pale, terrified face with a harsh, bright blue glow. He typed in his long master password, his fingers slipping on the smooth keys in his frantic, careless haste. He opened the encrypted web browser and navigated directly to the Davenport investment firm administrative portal. This was the master access point, the central nervous system of their entire massive financial empire spanning across multiple states. From this dashboard, he could easily control every single asset transfer, every liquid cash account, and every corporate credit line tied directly to the family name. It was the exact same portal Camille had meticulously managed for years, keeping their books perfectly balanced and their tax records legally compliant. Harrison typed his administrative credentials into the login boxes. He took a deep, shaky breath, whispering a silent, desperate plea that the wire transfer had not cleared the final banking hurdle. He moved the cursor to the authentication button and clicked it, ready to rip the $500,000 directly out. The small trackpad clicked loudly in the quiet room. Harrison watched the screen with bated breath, expecting to see the familiar green confirmation checkmark that usually followed his administrative commands. Instead, the web browser displayed a small spinning gray circle. It turned round and round, rendering the page completely frozen. The digital gears of the Davenport portal were grinding to a sudden, unnatural halt. He tapped his finger impatiently against the edge of the keyboard. The heavy silence in the room amplified the sound of his ragged breathing. Charles stood directly behind him, radiating a suffocating heat and a furious impatience. "What is taking so long?" Charles demanded, his voice a harsh whisper that cut through the tension. "You told me this was a simple click of a button. Fix it immediately before that woman withdraws a single cent." "It is just buffering," Harrison replied, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. He wiped a bead of cold sweat from his forehead, using the back of his trembling hand. "The hospital internet must be running slow today. It will clear the transaction in just a second." But the transaction did not clear. The spinning gray circle abruptly vanished, and the screen flashed bright white. A stark black text box materialized right in the center of the display. It read, "Access denied," in bold block letters. Below the warning, a smaller line of text indicated that the administrative credentials entered were no longer recognized by the host server. Harrison stared at the error message in sheer disbelief. He blinked rapidly, thinking his tear-filled eyes were playing tricks on him. He had used that exact password every single day for the past 4 years. It was deeply embedded in his muscle memory. He quickly moved the cursor to the text box and deleted the password field. "I must have fat-fingered the keyboard in my rush," he muttered nervously, forcing a weak, hollow laugh that fooled absolutely no one in the room. "I am retyping it right now." He placed his fingers carefully over the keys. He typed the long alphanumeric sequence with deliberate, agonizing precision, ensuring every single uppercase letter and special character was perfectly placed. He pressed the enter key with a forceful strike of his index finger. The screen flashed again, instantly rejecting him. The same access denied message mocked him from the center of the monitor. Harrison felt the blood drain completely from his face. A cold, terrifying numbness began to spread through his chest. This was not a simple typo. The system was actively rejecting his highest-level clearance. "Move out of the way," Charles barked violently, shoving Harrison by the shoulder. The patriarch leaned over the laptop, his face inches from the glowing screen. "You are too panicked to type a simple password. Let me use my executive login." Charles pushed his son aside and took control of the keyboard. He typed his own heavily encrypted credentials with aggressive, forceful keystrokes. He hit the enter button, expecting the digital gates of his empire to swing wide open. The portal rejected him just as violently. The screen flashed a new message stating that the executive profile had been completely disabled. Charles let out a low, primal growl of frustration. "What kind of incompetent garbage is this?" he spat, glaring at the laptop as if it had personally insulted him. "Call the IT department right now, Harrison. Wake up whoever is on call and tell them they are fired the second they fix this glitch." "Dad, it is not a glitch," Harrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the roaring panic in his own ears. "Both of our profiles are disabled. That means someone manually revoked our access from inside the network. I have to use the master administrative override. It is the only backdoor we have left." Harrison pulled the laptop back onto his lap. He opened a new command terminal window, bringing up a stark black screen with green text. This was the ultimate failsafe, a direct line into the deepest architecture of the Davenport investment firm. It bypassed all standard security protocols. He typed in the complex string of code that only he, his father, and their lead accountant possessed. He held his breath and pressed enter, praying the raw code would force the system to yield. For 3 agonizing seconds, the terminal window remained completely blank. Then the entire screen abruptly changed. The dark terminal vanished, completely replaced by a glaring, blindingly bright red background that illuminated the terrified faces of the entire Davenport family. It was not a Davenport system error. It was a federal notification. At the very top of the screen, sitting side by side, were 2 highly detailed official government seals. On the left was the stark, imposing eagle of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. On the right was the unmistakable crest of the Internal Revenue Service. Below the seals, massive white letters stretched across the glaring red background. Notice of federal seizure. All associated assets, operating accounts, and trust funds have been frozen by order of the federal court. Harrison stopped breathing entirely. The laptop slipped an inch down his thighs, but he could not move his hands to catch it. He was completely paralyzed. Behind him, Catherine let out a soft, horrifying whimper. Preston grabbed the back of the sofa, his knuckles turning stark white as he stared at the red glow. Charles stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. The patriarch's aggressive, domineering posture crumbled into dust right before their eyes. "Read the rest of it," Charles whispered, his voice suddenly sounding like that of a very old, frail man. Harrison forced his eyes to track the smaller text below the massive warning. This action is the direct result of an ongoing federal investigation into massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe tax evasion. Access is permanently suspended pending federal indictment. Please contact the assigned prosecutor. They were entirely ruined. The warning did not need to say anything more. The glaring red light from the laptop screen cast long, distorted shadows across the VIP waiting room, painting the terrified faces of the Davenport family in the color of a federal nightmare. Charles staggered backward until his spine hit the edge of the catered coffee station. His breath came in short, raspy wheezes as his mind desperately tried to reject the stark reality of the notice. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not issue blanket freezes on massive investment firms by accident. The Internal Revenue Service did not lock down personal trust funds without an ironclad, meticulously documented case. Someone had handed the federal government the exact blueprints to the Davenport financial labyrinth. Harrison stared at the red screen, his chest heaving as the pieces of the puzzle began to violently snap together in his mind. He slowly lifted his hands away from the keyboard, terrified that touching it again might trigger another catastrophic warning. His thoughts raced frantically backward, tearing through the events of the past few months, searching for the leak. And then, with the sickening force of a physical blow to the stomach, he realized the truth. The leak was not a disgruntled employee or a rival corporate spy. The architect of their destruction was the quiet, unassuming woman he had just proudly discarded in a downtown boardroom. For 8 years, the Davenports had laughed at Camille's profession while secretly depending on the very skills they mocked. They called her a suburban numbers pusher, never realizing that she was the only person who truly understood the financial rot beneath their polished empire. The Davenport fortune was not solid. It was a crumbling structure of illegal debt, falsified reports, hidden liabilities, and carefully disguised tax fraud. For years, Camille had been the one quietly holding the system together, not because Charles deserved protection, but because she wanted to spare her children the public horror of watching their family collapse on the evening news. That protection ended the moment she discovered Harrison's affair. 6 months before the divorce, Camille stopped repairing the damage. She began separating her name from every account, every report, every legal exposure, and every hidden liability. Then, 24 hours before signing the divorce papers, she submitted the one thing Charles Davenport feared most: the raw, unedited truth. The federal freeze was not an accident. It was not a glitch. It was Camille removing her hands from the dam and letting the flood do exactly what it was always going to do. Harrison stared blindly at the red federal notice on his laptop screen, the devastating reality of her vast intellect finally crashing down on him, crushing his fragile ego into dust. He looked over his shoulder at Charles, who was now clutching his chest, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. The arrogant patriarch, who had built his entire identity on absolute financial control, was now completely powerless. Every single asset, every property deed, and every offshore account they thought was safely hidden had been locked tight. There was absolutely no maneuvering out of this catastrophe. She had not signed those divorce papers out of weakness or submission. She had signed them to legally finalize her escape before the federal government burned his family to the ground. She had smiled in that boardroom because she knew that while they were mocking her supposed mediocrity, Federal agents were already preparing their warrants. The woman they had relentlessly mocked as ordinary had flawlessly orchestrated their total destruction without ever raising her voice. The silence in the clinic waiting room was abruptly shattered by a sharp, piercing ringtone. It was not the laptop issuing another federal warning. It was the cell phone resting inside the breast pocket of Charles Davenport's tailored suit. For a moment, Charles just stared down at his chest, as if the phone were a live explosive device. His hands were shaking so violently that he fumbled the device twice before finally pulling it out. The caller identification on the screen read, Chicago Headquarters Security. Charles answered the phone. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Marcus, the head of building security for the Davenport Tower, and he was speaking in a frantic, breathless panic. "Mr. Davenport, you need to get down here right now," Marcus practically yelled over a chaotic background of shouting voices and heavy footsteps. "They are locking down the entire building. They are not letting anyone in or out of the main lobby." "Who is locking down the building?" Charles demanded, his voice cracking as he tried to project authority he no longer possessed. "Call the police, Marcus." "It is the police, sir," Marcus responded, his voice trembling with sheer terror. "It is the federal government. There are at least 40 agents swarming the lobby right now. They are wearing windbreakers with FBI and SEC printed on the back. They bypassed my desk completely and went straight for the executive elevators. They have warrants, Mr. Davenport. They are carrying boxes and computer equipment." Charles felt his knees completely give out. He slumped down heavily onto the velvet sofa in absolute shock. "They are already on the 42nd floor." Marcus continued, his panicked words tumbling out in a rapid rush. "They are unplugging the master servers in the IT department. They are pulling hard drives directly out of the walls. They are seizing all the physical filing cabinets from the accounting floor. They told everyone to step away from their desks and put their hands where they can be seen. Sir, they are asking for your exact location." "Hang up the phone," Charles whispered, his voice entirely hollow. "Sir, they are threatening to arrest me if I do not tell them where you are," Marcus pleaded, but Charles did not wait to hear the rest. He let the phone slip from his sweaty fingers. The device hit the floor with a sharp crack. The call disconnected, leaving the room in a suffocating, terrified silence once again. "They are raiding the headquarters," Charles announced, staring blankly at the shattered phone. "Federal agents are seizing the servers right now. They are taking everything. The federal agents are tearing apart the executive suites as we speak." Catherine let out a piercing, hysterical scream and buried her face in her hands. Preston backed away toward the door, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if expecting federal agents to burst through the clinic walls at any second. Harrison remained frozen in his chair, staring at the red federal notice still glowing on his laptop screen. The physical reality of the digital freeze was happening miles away in their pristine corporate lobby. The untouchable Davenport empire was being dismantled piece by piece in front of their employees and the entire Chicago financial district. "Call her," Charles suddenly ordered, his head snapping up to look at Harrison. His eyes were wild with a desperate primal panic. "Call Camille right this instant. She is the only one who knows how the internal ledgers are structured. She is the only one who knows where the offshore holding companies are registered. She built the firewall around the debt. She can explain this to the federal prosecutors. She can tell them it was a massive accounting error." Harrison stared at his father, realizing that the older man was completely detached from reality. "Dad, she is the one who did this," Harrison said, his voice trembling with terror. "She is the one who submitted the raw data to the government. She orchestrated this entire freeze. She is not going to help us." "I said call her, Charles!" roared spit flying from his lips as he lunged forward and grabbed the lapels of Harrison's suit. "You are going to call your wife, and you are going to remind her that she is still legally bound to this family. You are going to tell her that if she does not fix this immediately, I will personally see to it that she never works in the financial sector again. I will destroy her reputation. Call her now." Harrison violently pushed his father away. His own panic was reaching a boiling point. The thought of facing federal prison, the thought of losing his entire identity, was entirely paralyzing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock the screen. He opened his contacts and scrolled rapidly to Camille's name. He pressed the call button and brought the phone to his ear. He closed his eyes silently, praying that she would pick up. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to beg. He wanted to offer her whatever she wanted: the Chicago estate, full custody of the children, a massive percentage of whatever wealth they could salvage. He just needed her to answer the phone and tell him how to stop the bleeding. The phone rang once. It rang twice. It rang a third time. Harrison held his breath, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then the line clicked. Harrison opened his mouth to speak, to pour out a desperate flood of apologies and promises. "We are sorry, but the cellular subscriber you are trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave your message after the tone." The automated voice was cold and indifferent. It was the standard recording of a phone that had been completely powered off or destroyed. The beep echoed loudly in his ear. "Pick up the damn phone," Camille Harrison shouted into the receiver, ignoring the tears of frustration stinging his eyes. "This is not a game anymore. The feds are at the building. You have made your point. You proved how smart you are. Now call me back immediately. We need to fix this before it goes entirely public. I am sorry about Chelsea. I will do whatever you want. Just call me back." He ended the call and immediately pressed the redial button. He paced the length of the waiting room, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The phone rang 3 times and went straight to the automated voicemail again. "Camille, it is me again," Harrison pleaded into the phone, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "Please do not do this. You are the mother of my children. You cannot send their grandfather to federal prison. You cannot destroy the family legacy. I know you are angry, but this is going too far. Pick up your phone." He hung up and dialed a 3rd time, then a 4th, then a 5th. He stood by the panoramic window staring out at the gray Chicago skyline, leaving increasingly frantic and pathetic voice messages. He begged her to remember the good times. He tried to manipulate her using Leo and Sophie. He threatened her with legal action. He offered her hollow, meaningless apologies. Every single call was met with the exact same automated response. The electronic voice became a torturous, repetitive reminder of his absolute powerlessness. Harrison slowly lowered the phone from his ear. The battery was draining rapidly, but the screen showed 0 incoming calls, 0 text messages, and 0 hope. He looked back at his family. His mother was sobbing hysterically into a velvet cushion. His brother was furiously texting his own lawyer, attempting to distance himself from the firm. His father was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at a spot on the wall, looking entirely broken. "She is not answering." Harrison whispered, his voice dropping to a hollow, terrified rasp. "The phone is completely turned off. It is going straight to voicemail." The heavy realization finally settled over the room, suffocating whatever remaining hope they clung to. Camille was not coming back. She was not hiding in a suburban rental waiting for an apology. She was not going to negotiate. She had spent years quietly absorbing their insults, their cruelty, and their betrayals, while simultaneously holding the keys to their entire kingdom. Now she had casually tossed those keys directly to the federal government and walked away. The invisible protective shield she had maintained for years had completely vanished, leaving the Davenport family entirely exposed, naked, and defenseless against the crushing weight of their own criminal arrogance. For several long minutes, the waiting room remained frozen in stunned silence. But panic never stays quiet for long. It quickly began to mutate into something uglier: self-preservation. But panic is a highly combustible emotion, and for the younger Davenport siblings, it quickly mutated into a frantic, desperate instinct for self-preservation. Preston and Beatrice had never worked a single legitimate day in their entirely privileged lives. Their massive allowances, designer wardrobes, and luxury penthouse leases were all directly tied to the very operating accounts that were currently being seized by federal agents across town. Preston pulled his own smartphone from his pocket and frantically tapped the screen. He logged into his personal mobile banking application, his thumb shaking violently. The screen loaded to reveal a stark 0 balance. His platinum credit cards, his emergency liquid cash reserves, his travel accounts, everything was completely locked. He shoved the phone in her face, his eyes wide with rising terror. "Look at this, Beatrice," he hissed, his voice barely a terrified whisper so their father would not hear. "My accounts are totally frozen. Every single credit card is declining. We have absolutely nothing." Beatrice snatched her own phone from her designer handbag and checked her balances. The color completely drained from her perfectly contoured face when she saw the exact same zero balance staring back at her. "We are going to be completely ruined," she whispered back, her breath catching in her throat. "My entire brand is built on the Davenport name. If the press gets hold of this federal raid before we do, I will lose all my sponsorships. I will be completely canceled by tonight." Preston grabbed her arm, pulling her tightly into the corner of the room, away from their catatonic parents and their devastated brother. "We have to get ahead of the story," Preston said, his eyes darting around the room as he formulated a sloppy, desperate plan. "We have to control the narrative before the government issues a formal press release. Everyone already knows Harrison was getting divorced today. It is public record. If we spin this right, we can blame the entire financial disaster directly on Camille. We can tell the world she was stealing from the firm." Beatrice stared at her older brother, her mind racing as she absorbed the sinister logic of his plan. She had hundreds of thousands of followers on her social media platforms. Her audience was heavily populated by Chicago high society members, local journalists, and wealthy influencers who thrived on scandalous gossip. If she played the victim perfectly, she could turn the entire city against Camille. She could frame the federal raid not as a legitimate criminal investigation into her father, but as the vindictive sabotage of a bitter, discarded wife. "It is brilliant," Beatrice agreed, her voice trembling with a sudden surge of adrenaline. Camille was the lead compliance officer. She had total access to the master ledgers. We can say she was embezzling company funds for years to hide her own failures, and when Harrison finally caught her and demanded a divorce, she panicked. We tell everyone she fabricated the raw data to trigger a federal audit and cover her own tracks. We tell them she is framing our family because she could not handle being replaced by Chelsea. Preston nodded aggressively, completely ignoring the massive legal ramifications of publicly defaming an innocent woman who possessed irrefutable proof of their crimes. "Exactly," he said. "We make her the ultimate villain. We strike first, so when the federal indictments finally drop, the public will already think it is a massive misunderstanding caused by a jealous ex-wife. Do it right now, Beatrice. Make a video before the news vans arrive at the corporate tower." Beatrice immediately went into action. She moved toward the large panoramic window, using the gray natural light of the Chicago skyline to illuminate her face. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small makeup compact. Using her fingertips, she deliberately smudged her expensive mascara under her eyes, creating the perfect illusion of a woman who had been sobbing uncontrollably. She messed up her perfectly styled hair, letting a few strands fall across her forehead to complete the look of absolute devastation. She held her phone up at a slight angle, ensuring the luxurious medical suite was visible in the background to subtly remind her audience of their high status. Preston stepped into the frame, standing closely behind her shoulder, looking appropriately grim and protective. Beatrice took a deep breath, manufactured a flawless, trembling lower lip, and pressed the bright red record button. "Hey, everyone!" Beatrice started, her voice breaking perfectly on the first word. "I am so sorry to make a video like this, but my family is going through an absolute nightmare right now, and we need to share the truth before the rumors start spreading." She paused to wipe a fake tear from her cheek, letting out a soft, convincing sniffle. "As many of you know, my brother Harrison finalized his divorce this morning. What you do not know is why. For the past 3 years, his ex-wife Camille has been secretly embezzling millions of dollars from our family investment firm." Preston leaned toward the camera, his face hardened into a mask of righteous anger. "She used her position as our compliance officer to steal from the very company that put a roof over her head." Preston lied, his voice smooth and convincing. "When Harrison finally discovered the missing funds and confronted her, She completely snapped. She refused to take responsibility. Instead, she decided to try and destroy our entire family out of pure spite. Beatrice nodded her head tragically, keeping the camera focused tightly on her distressed expression. She fabricated financial documents and submitted false reports to the federal government to trigger an illegal audit. Beatrice continued, her voice shaking with manufactured outrage. She froze our accounts so we could not pay our employees or support our charitable foundations. She is trying to frame our father to cover up her own massive theft. We are cooperating fully with the authorities to clear our name, but we are just so heartbroken that someone we loved and trusted for 8 years could be this evil and vindictive. Please keep our family in your prayers while we fight to expose her lies. Beatrice hit the stop button and immediately uploaded the video directly to her primary feed. She did not consult a public relations expert or legal advisor before publishing. In their extreme arrogance, the siblings truly believed their vast social influence was more powerful than federal evidence. They watched the screen intently as the notification chimed, confirming the video was live to the public. Within seconds, the view count began to skyrocket. Comments flooded the screen from wealthy friends and followers, offering sympathy and expressing shock at her supposed betrayal. "We did it," Preston whispered, a sick, triumphant smile spreading across his pale face as he watched the supportive comments multiply. "We got ahead of the scandal. We completely ruined her reputation before she even lands in Scotland." Beatrice clutched her phone to her chest, letting out a heavy sigh of relief, believing they had saved their social standing. They stood in the corner entirely blind to the fact that they had just handed Camille the weapon she needed to deliver the final blow. Beatrice stared at the glowing screen of her smartphone, watching the heart icons multiply rapidly across her fake, tearful video. She truly believed she had manipulated the entire city of Chicago into viewing her as the tragic victim of a greedy suburban wife. Preston leaned over her shoulder, reading the sympathetic comments from wealthy heirs and local socialites. They felt a sickening sense of invincibility, completely unaware that their desperate social media stunt had just triggered a catastrophic legal avalanche. 5,000 miles away, in a quiet study overlooking the Scottish Highlands, Camille was not scrambling to defend herself. She was not panicking over a few nasty comments on the internet. She was calmly drinking a cup of hot tea while watching the predictable Davenport implosion on her own screen. She had anticipated their pathetic attempt to control the narrative. She knew they would try to weaponize their high society connections the moment the bank accounts locked, and she had already prepared her countermeasure. Before Beatrice could even begin replying to the fake condolences, her phone buzzed violently with a different kind of notification. It was a tag from a verified account belonging to Lawrence Reed, the senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the country. Beatrice frowned, her manicured thumb hovering over the screen. She tapped the notification, opening a brand new post that was already going dangerously viral. It was not a tearful plea or an emotional video. It was a stark, clinical press release printed on the heavy digital letterhead of Reed and Associates. The headline was short and completely devastating. "Statement regarding the defamatory allegations made by the Davenport family against my client." Beatrice felt the blood completely drain from her face. Her breathing stopped as her eyes darted across the sharply written paragraphs. The statement did not bother with emotional appeals. It was a surgical strike of pure, undeniable facts, designed to instantly dismantle the sloppy lies Beatrice had just broadcasted to the entire world. Preston snatched the phone from his sister's trembling hands and began reading the document out loud, his voice cracking with rising terror. "My client has endured years of systemic financial and emotional abuse at the hands of the Davenport family," the statement began. "In response to the highly defamatory and entirely fabricated video recently posted by Beatrice Davenport, we are releasing the following certified documents to immediately establish the truth." Preston swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. There were 3 digital links attached to the bottom of the legal release. He tapped the first one with a shaking finger. It opened a highly detailed certified timeline of Harrison and Chelsea. It included redacted credit card receipts for luxury hotel suites, expensive jewelry purchases, and intimate text messages spanning back 6 months. It provided absolute, irrefutable proof that Harrison was the one who had destroyed the marriage while Camille was quietly holding the family together. It painted Harrison not as a victim, but as a careless, arrogant cheater. Harrison, who had been sitting paralyzed on the velvet love seat, suddenly snapped his head up when he heard his brother reading. "What are you looking at?" Harrison demanded, his voice raw with panic. "What did you two do?" Beatrice could not answer. She was staring at the screen in pure horror as Preston clicked the second link. This document was heavily redacted to protect specific identifying details, but the core medical information was glaringly obvious. It was an official, sworn affidavit confirming the biological impossibility of Harrison fathering a child due to his previous surgical procedures. The affidavit completely vaporized Chelsea and her supposed miracle pregnancy. It exposed the entire celebration that had taken place in the clinic earlier that afternoon as a pathetic, humiliating sham. The entire city of Chicago would now know that the arrogant heir to the Davenport empire had blown up his marriage and his public reputation for a woman who was actively scamming him with another man's baby. The public humiliation was absolute. But the final link was the one that drove the final nail into the coffin of the Davenport legacy. Preston tapped the third link, and the screen immediately redirected to the official public database of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. There was no spin, no public relations manipulation, and no way to deny what was written on the government website. It was the direct public filing of the federal freeze order detailing the massive long-standing embezzlement wire fraud and severe tax evasion orchestrated by Charles. The document explicitly stated that the internal compliance officer, meaning Camille, was the whistleblower who had provided the raw, unedited data to the authorities. She was not a thief. She was the one who caught the thieves. She had not stolen a single dime. She had simply stopped covering up their massive, sprawling criminal enterprise. The truth was out there, backed by the full, terrifying weight of the federal government. The reaction on social media was instantaneous and violently brutal. Beatrice watched in absolute terror as the view count on her tearful video skyrocketed for all the wrong reasons. The supportive comments from her wealthy friends abruptly stopped. They were instantly replaced by a tidal wave of angry, disgusted backlash. People despised being lied to, especially by out-of-touch socialites attempting to frame an innocent mother. The comments flooded in, calling Beatrice a liar, a fraud, and a criminal. High society influencers who had liked the video just minutes before were rapidly deleting their comments and posting public retractions, desperately trying to distance themselves from the radioactive Davenport name. Beatrice watched her follower count begin to hemorrhage, dropping by the thousands every single minute. The pristine brand she had built on the illusion of Davenport superiority was disintegrating in real time. Her entire life was completely falling apart right in front of her eyes. The digital destruction quickly spilled over into their immediate physical reality. Charles' phone, which he had picked up from the floor, suddenly rang again. It was the president of the exclusive Oakwood Country Club, where the Davenports had held a premium membership for 3 decades. Charles answered the phone with a trembling hand, hoping for a friendly voice. The president did not offer any pleasantries. He coldly informed Charles that due to the extremely public federal fraud charges and the resulting media scandal, the country club board had voted unanimously to instantly and permanently revoke their family membership. They were no longer welcome on the property, and security had been formally instructed to turn them away at the main gates. Charles dropped the phone, his face completely slack with shock. The untouchable patriarch had just been formally exiled from his own elite society. Catherine, who was still sitting on the clinic floor, felt her own phone vibrating relentlessly inside her designer handbag. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a flood of text messages from the wealthy women in her charity bridge club. They were not texting to offer their support. They were texting to express their absolute disgust, demanding that Catherine immediately resign from all her prominent social committee chair positions. Her credit cards were declining, Her wealthy friends were actively abandoning her, and her family name was ruined forever. The Davenports had absolutely nothing left. They were utterly broken. And the worst part was knowing they had done this to themselves. There was absolutely no chance of any escape today. When the sun finally set over the Chicago skyline that evening, the Davenport family had retreated to their various corners like wounded animals. Harrison sat alone in the dark living room of his luxury townhouse. Federal agents had not raided his residence yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. He stared at the blank screen, his mind racing through the catastrophic events. The accounts were frozen, the social media backlash was deafening, and Chelsea was gone forever. His father was facing an indictment by Monday. In the cold quiet of his empty house, Harrison clung to one desperate, delusional lifeline. He convinced himself Camille was just throwing a massive temper tantrum. He reasoned she was sitting in a cheap, cramped apartment in Scotland, terrified of what she had just done. He believed if he could locate her, he could fly there and manipulate her back into submission. He assumed her modest settlement money would burn out quickly and she would be desperate for his financial security. But his bank accounts were entirely locked and his credit cards were useless. If he wanted to find his ex-wife, he needed untraceable cash. He walked into his master bedroom. He opened his mahogany watch case and pulled out a heavy gold Rolex. It was a sickening blow to his pride, but he slipped the watch into his coat pocket and drove to a high-end pawnbroker on the north side. He walked out having traded the $30,000 timepiece for $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. With the thick envelope of cash resting heavily in his jacket, Harrison drove to a poorly lit strip mall on the outskirts. He parked his expensive car next to a flickering neon sign that read, "Thorne Investigations." Thomas Thorne was a private investigator the Davenport firm had occasionally used for quiet corporate background checks. He was expensive, discreet, and incredibly efficient. Harrison walked into the small, dusty office and dropped the envelope of cash directly onto Thorne's battered metal desk. Thorne looked up from his computer monitor, raising a single gray eyebrow at the sight of the desperate, disheveled Davenport heir. Harrison did not bother with pleasantries. He immediately demanded that Thorne find Camille. He provided her full name, her date of birth, and the fact that she had boarded a flight to Edinburgh from O'Hare. "Find her exact address right now," Harrison ordered, his voice strained and frantic. "She is probably staying in a budget hotel or a cheap short-term rental on the edge of town. Just get me the physical location so I can go talk to her." Thorne slowly opened the envelope, counted the $100 bills, and nodded his head. He told Harrison to go home and wait for his call. For the next 48 hours, Harrison lived in a state of agonizing suspense. He ignored the frantic phone calls from his parents and the relentless emails from his corporate lawyers. He sat in the dark, pacing the hardwood floors, jumping every time a car drove past his window. He meticulously rehearsed the speech he would give Camille when he found her in her depressing little flat. He would offer her forgiveness. He would magnanimously offer to let her come back to Chicago. He would play the hero, rescuing her from the dreary life she had mistakenly chosen. Late Sunday afternoon, his phone finally vibrated with a text message from Thorne. The message contained an address for a small independent coffee shop in a working-class neighborhood miles away from the financial district. Harrison grabbed his coat and rushed out the door. When he arrived at the coffee shop, he found Thorne sitting in a back booth nursing a black coffee. A thick manila folder rested on the scarred wooden table between them. Harrison slid into the booth across from the investigator, his heart pounding with desperate anticipation. "You found her?" Harrison asked, reaching eagerly for the folder. Thorne placed his large hand flat on top of the file, stopping Harrison from opening it. "I found her," Thorne confirmed, his voice entirely neutral. "But you need to prepare yourself, Mr. Davenport. I have been tracking down missing spouses and hidden assets for over 20 years. I have never seen anything quite like what I uncovered over the weekend. Your ex-wife is not the woman you described to me on Friday night." Harrison scoffed, rolling his eyes with arrogant impatience. "Just give me the address, Thorne. She is an accountant from the suburbs who is currently throwing a legally complicated pity party. I know exactly who she is, and I know exactly how to handle her. I just need to know which cheap apartment block she is hiding in so I can book my commercial flight to Scotland." Thorne slowly removed his hand from the folder. He leaned back in his booth and gestured for Harrison to open it. "I suggest you look at the photographs first," Thorne said quietly. Harrison opened the folder expecting to see a cheap rental address, a budget hotel receipt, or some pathetic little apartment where Camille had gone to lick her wounds. Instead, the first photograph showed a vast historic estate in the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by private gardens, stone walls, and rolling green land. His fingers froze on the edge of the page. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly thin. Thorne leaned back in the booth. "Her home." Harrison let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, but it died almost immediately when Thorne turned the next page. There was the deed. There was the cash purchase record. There was the private holding company. There was the acquisition filing connected to a financial compliance software patent Harrison had never even known existed. "She did not use your settlement," Thorne said quietly. "She did not run because she was desperate. She left because she was finished." Harrison stared at the estate until the image blurred in front of him. The truth was finally undeniable. Camille had never needed his name, his money, or his family. She had only needed the right moment to walk away. Harrison staggered out of the investigator office and into the freezing Chicago wind. The manila folder felt like a block of lead in his hands. He climbed into the driver's seat of his expensive car and slammed the heavy door shut against the howling wind. Instead, he turned on the dome light and stared at the slip of paper Thorne had handed him. It contained a long international phone number pulled directly from the Scottish real estate documents. For a long time, Harrison just sat there gripping the steering wheel. His entire reality had been inverted. The woman he thought he was discarding had been 10 steps ahead of him, holding all the cards and millions of dollars while he played the fool. His hands shook as he unlocked his phone. He had to pay exorbitant international calling fees, but he did not care. He typed in the country code and the long string of digits. He pressed the call button and brought the phone to his ear. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself. The line clicked and buzzed with a distant ring. It rang twice, then 3 times. Harrison held his breath, terrified she would not answer, but on the 4th ring the line connected. "Hello," Camille said. Her voice was remarkably clear. It sounded relaxed, unhurried, and devoid of the anxiety that was eating Harrison alive. In the background, he could hear the faint sound of wind blowing across open land and the distant chatter of birds. It was a serene, peaceful sound that sharply contrasted with the chaotic, blaring sirens of the Chicago streets surrounding him. She simply waited for him to speak. "Camille." "Oh my God, Camille, please do not hang up," Harrison blurted out. The sound of her voice broke whatever fragile composure he had left. To his own deep humiliation, a loud, ragged sob tore through his throat. He started crying right there in his luxury car, gripping the phone like a drowning man. "It is me. It is Harrison. Please, you have to talk to me. I know absolutely everything now. I know how you tricked us. I know about the software buyout. I know about the estate in Scotland. I just left a private investigator who showed me the bank statements. You have to listen to me, please." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Harrison could clearly hear her taking a slow, quiet sip from a teacup. "I am listening to you, Harrison," she replied, her tone perfectly neutral and detached. "You have exactly 2 minutes to say what you need to say before I end this call." Her cold detachment only fueled his frantic desperation. He launched into a pathetic, tear-soaked monologue, completely abandoning whatever shred of dignity he still possessed. "I was out of my mind, Camille." He pleaded, the tears streaming down his face and soaking into the collar of his expensive shirt. "I was completely out of my mind. It was Chelsea. She manipulated me from the very beginning. She preyed on me when I was vulnerable. She lied about the pregnancy to trap me, and she used my fear of my father against me. I swear to you, I never actually loved her. She was just a distraction. A terrible mistake. I threw her out of the clinic today. I kicked her to the curb the second the doctor told us the truth. You were right about her all along. She is a parasite. I should have never looked at another woman. He waited for her to say something to express a sliver of sympathy or even righteous anger at his confession. He desperately wanted her to yell loudly at him so he could immediately apologize. But the phone line remained completely silent. The sheer absence of her emotional reaction forced him to keep talking, to keep digging his own grave deeper into the dirt. I am so sorry, Harrison sobbed, rubbing his swollen eyes. I am sorry for how my parents treated you. I am sorry for what I did to our family. I was a coward. But you made your point, Camille. You destroyed my ego and you exposed Chelsea for the fraud she is. You won the war. I admit it freely. You won everything. But please, you have to call off the federal government. You have to fix this disaster. They raided the corporate tower today. They took all the servers. My father is going to be arrested on Monday morning, and they locked every single account we have. We are completely and utterly financially ruined. He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. But you can stop it! He begged, his voice cracking into a desperate pitch. You have the money now. You have millions from your tech software. You can pay the federal fines. You can hire the best defense attorneys in the country to keep my father out of a jail cell. You can log back into the portal and restructure the debt just like you did before. You know exactly how the offshore holding companies are set up. You can make this entire federal investigation go away. I know you can. You are the smartest person I have ever met. Please, Camille, I am begging you to use your money and your brilliant mind to save us. Save my father from prison. Save our family name from destruction. He paused, gasping for air in his car. Still, Camille said absolutely nothing. Her silence was maddening. It was a blank canvas that forced him to project all of his worst fears onto it. Out of sheer panic, he decided to play his final desperate card. He tried to weaponize the very history he had so casually discarded just a few hours ago. Camille, he whispered, his voice collapsing into something small and desperate. You saved me once. You were the only person who knew the truth about the cancer, the surgery, everything. You protected me when I could not protect myself. I know I betrayed you. I know I failed you. But please do not let this be the end of my life. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it. I will sign anything. I will give you anything. Just do not leave me here with nothing. Harrison stopped talking. His chest was heaving, his face was wet with tears, and his throat was burning. He had laid every single one of his cards on the table. He had thrown his mistress under the bus, he had admitted his own stupidity, and he had begged for financial salvation using the vows of their marriage as leverage. He sat alone in the dark cabin of his freezing cold car, listening to the faint Scottish wind blowing through the speaker of his phone, desperately waiting for the woman he had underestimated to offer him a lifeline. The faint sound of the Scottish wind through the phone speaker shifted slightly as Camille adjusted her position thousands of miles away. When she finally broke the silence, her voice did not carry a single trace of the anger Harrison so desperately expected. There was no bitterness, no lingering resentment, and certainly no pity. Her tone was clinical and precise. It was the voice of a woman who was looking at a complicated math equation she had already solved months ago. Are you quite finished, Harrison? She asked, her words slicing through his pathetic sobbing with absolute chilling calm. You are crying because you got caught. You are crying because your credit cards are declining and your country club membership is gone. You are not shedding a single tear for me or for the children you happily erased from your life this morning. Harrison opened his mouth to protest, but she did not let him speak. Her voice remained perfectly level, never rising in volume, but commanding the space with an iron authority he had never heard from her before. Do not interrupt me, she commanded softly. You spent the last 8 years controlling every conversation in our marriage. You do not get to do that anymore. You dared to sit in your car and lecture me about the promises we made in front of our families. Let us talk about those families, Harrison. Let us talk about how your parents treated me from the exact second I walked into your pristine house. She paused. Harrison gripped the steering wheel so tightly his hands ached. his chest heaving as he listened to the devastating clarity in her voice. For 8 years I endured a daily campaign of psychological humiliation from your mother and father. Camille continued, her words falling like heavy stones in the dark car. They insulted my career to my face, calling me a simple numbers pusher, while secretly relying on me to keep Charles out of a federal penitentiary. And what did you do, Harrison? You stood right next to them and nodded. You let them push our beautiful children into corners during your lavish dinner parties because Leo and Sophie were not refined enough for your wealthy friends. You let your mother call my son soft. You let your father call me a bad investment. You never once defended me. You never once acted like a husband. I was just trying to keep the peace. Harrison whimpered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of her accuracy. My father is a difficult man. I did not want to cause a rift. You did not want peace, Harrison. Camille said. You wanted protection without loyalty. When you were sick, I protected your body, your reputation, and your place in that family. I carried the secret you were too ashamed to face, and the moment you recovered, you punished me for knowing it. That was not Chelsea's fault. That was not your father's fault. That was your choice. Harrison squeezed his eyes shut, tears leaking out onto his cheeks. The reality of his betrayal was staring him right in the face, and it was entirely hideous. You did not want a partner, Harrison, Camille said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling pitch that sent a shiver down his spine. You wanted a shield. I protected your health, your family freedom, and your pride. You traded it for a lie. You are exactly where you belong. No, please do not say that, Harrison begged, shaking his head frantically in the dark. I made a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. I threw Chelsea out. I am completely done with her. We can start over. You are completely missing the point, Camille replied, her tone reflecting a profound exhaustion with his stupidity. I do not care what you did with Chelsea. I do not care if you marry her or throw her onto the street. Your relationship with that woman is entirely irrelevant to me. I detached myself from you the moment I saw those credit card receipts 6 months ago. I watched you buy her diamonds using the very money I was hiding from the federal government. I watched you brag to your friends about your virility, knowing perfectly well what I sacrificed to keep you alive. You think this is a misunderstanding that can be fixed with an apology. It is not. This is a controlled demolition, Harrison. I built the firewall that kept your family empire standing, and when I realized you were all parasites, I simply walked out and took the firewall with me. Harrison shifted his car into drive, his hands shaking as he pulled out of the parking lot. He needed to get to his parents' house to show his father he was negotiating. He put the phone on speaker, resting it on the center console. Camille, you have to listen, he pleaded, driving erratically through the quiet streets. You cannot want Leo and Sophie to have a criminal grandfather. Use your money. Pay off the prosecutors. I will sign over my entire share of the company to you. I will give you anything. I already have everything, Camille stated smoothly. I have complete financial independence. I have my children, and they are safe from the toxic poison of the Davenport name. As for your father going to prison, that is not my problem to solve. Charles broke federal laws for decades. He stole millions. I just stopped hiding his crimes. If he goes to a federal penitentiary, he put himself there. You are all adults. It is time you finally experience the consequences of your own actions. Harrison pulled his car into the sweeping driveway of his parents' estate in Lincoln Park. The massive house was ablaze with lights. He grabbed the phone, his desperation reaching a fever pitch as he ran up the brick pathway. Camille. I am walking into the house right now, Harrison said, his voice bordering on hysteria. My mother is falling apart. My father is having a breakdown. Just give me a roadmap. Tell me what accounts to move. Tell me what to do. I am going to tell you exactly what to do, Camille said, perfectly steady. You are going to hire a good criminal defense attorney. You are going to pack a small bag with comfortable clothes, and you are going to wait for the federal marshals to knock on your door. There is no roadmap out of this. I made absolutely sure of it. Harrison burst through the heavy oak front doors. The foyer was a complete and utter disaster. Papers were scattered across the marble floor. His mother, Catherine, was sitting on the staircase sobbing uncontrollably while Charles shouted into a phone nearby. Harrison stood in the center of the room trembling. He had entirely run out of manipulations. The chilling boundary Camille had established was impenetrable. She was a fortress, and he was standing naked in a hurricane. He realized with absolute horrifying clarity that she was never going to save them. Harrison stood frozen in the center of the ruined foyer, with the phone still clutched tightly in his trembling hand. His silence must have communicated the utter hopelessness of the situation, because his mother abruptly stopped her hysterical sobbing on the grand staircase. Catherine lifted her tear-streaked face, looking down at her son. Her perfectly styled hair was now a tangled mess falling wildly around her shoulders. She looked at Harrison, and her wide, panicked eyes darted to the glowing screen of the cell phone resting in his palm. A sudden, desperate realization sparked in her expression. She recognized that her eldest son had completely failed to salvage their lives. The patriarch of the family was broken, sitting catatonic in the clinic across town. The golden heir was entirely powerless, standing defeated in the hallway. The only lifeline they had left in the entire world was currently on the other end of that cellular connection. With a frantic, uncharacteristic burst of physical energy, Catherine scrambled up from the cold marble steps. Her expensive silk designer dress rustled wildly as she lunged across the massive foyer. She shoved Harrison aside with surprising physical force and snatched the phone directly out of his hand. She pressed the device tightly against her cheek, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it on the hard stone floor. The aristocratic composure she had spent decades cultivating, the icy exterior that had terrified Chicago high society, completely vanished in an instant. She was suddenly just a terrified, bankrupt older woman facing the terrifying prospect of total social and financial annihilation. She needed a massive miracle, and she was willing to throw away every last ounce of her pride to beg for it. "Camille, are you still there?" Catherine cried out, her voice, a shrill, vibrating whine that echoed loudly off the high, vaulted ceilings of the Lincoln Park estate. "Please tell me you are still on the line. You have to listen to me, Camille. I know we have had our differences in the past. I know things have been very difficult between us. But you cannot do this to us. You cannot let this terrible tragedy happen to our family." Catherine paused, gasping for air, waiting desperately for a response. The line remained completely silent, but the faint ambient sound of the Scottish wind confirmed the international connection was still active. Catherine gripped the phone with both hands, tears pouring down her cheeks and completely ruining her expensive makeup. She decided to deploy the ultimate emotional weapon, the one manipulation she truly believed no mother could ever resist. "Camille, please, you have to think about Leo. And Sophie." Catherine wept, injecting a fake, desperate warmth into her voice. "You have to think about your precious children. They need their family right now. They need their grandparents. We love them so much. If you let the federal government destroy this company, you are destroying their legacy. You are robbing them of their rightful inheritance. How will you ever explain to them when they grow up that you allowed their beloved grandfather to be treated like a common criminal? For the sake of your children, Camille, please fix this disaster. Do not let the Davenport name be dragged through the mud on national television. They carry this exact same name too. They need to be proud of where they come from. Please be reasonable and come home so we can heal this broken family together." The silence that followed her desperate plea felt heavier and more suffocating than before. Catherine held her breath, looking frantically at Harrison, who was staring at the floor in total defeat. She truly believed her dramatic tears would work. Then Camille finally spoke. Her voice was just as cold, just as clinical, and just as entirely impenetrable as it had been with Harrison. "Do not ever use my children as a shield." Camille said, her voice turning dangerously cold. "You had 8 years to love them. 8 years to show up to protect them, to make them feel like they belonged. Instead, you treated them like an embarrassment. You hid them from guests, criticized their personalities, and made them feel small inside a house that should have been their home. You do not get to discover grandmotherly love now that your money is gone. You viewed them as a permanent stain on your precious aristocratic bloodline. But I love them! Catherine choked out, her voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. I am their grandmother. You have to believe me. You are a biological technicality, Camille corrected her, instantly stripping away the final illusion. You are not a grandmother. You are a toxic, raging narcissist who only values people based on their net worth and their current social standing. You desperately wanted an heir who fit your rigid aristocratic delusion, and you actively encouraged your son to abandon his real loyal family to get one. Well, you got exactly what you asked for, Catherine. You got Chelsea and her entirely fictional miracle. You do not get to claim my children now that your fraudulent empire is burning to the ground. You do not get to use them as a convenient human shield against federal indictments. You made your choices, and you clearly demonstrated your cruel priorities every single day for the past 8 years. Please, Catherine wailed, falling heavily to her knees on the marble floor. Please do not do this to us. My children do not need your toxic legacy. Camille stated, her voice ringing with absolute, unshakable finality. They are completely safe. They are immensely wealthy, and they are completely free from your control. They are living in a historic estate in Scotland where they can run freely in the halls and eat at the main dining table every single night. They will never be made to feel inferior again. They will never know the suffocating toxicity of the Davenport name because I have legally removed it from our lives entirely. We are completely done here, Catherine. All of you are going to face the harsh reality of what you have done. Do not ever attempt to contact us again. A sharp, definitive click echoed loudly through the speaker of the phone. The call completely disconnected. Catherine frantically pressed the redial button, her trembling fingers slipping wildly across the glass screen. She held the phone back up to her ear, praying for another chance to beg. The phone rang exactly once before the automated voice system chimed in. We are sorry, but the cellular subscriber you are trying to reach is not accepting calls from this number. Camille had hung up and permanently blocked them on the international network. Catherine slowly lowered her shaking hand and dropped the phone onto the cold marble floor. The expensive device slid across the smooth, polished surface and came to a quiet stop near Harrison leather shoes. The matriarch of the Davenport family buried her face in her hands and let out a long, agonizing scream of total, absolute defeat. The fortress they had built was entirely gone, the stolen money was permanently gone, and their public ruin was finally irreversibly permanent. The consequences of that ruin arrived with brutal punctuality just 48 hours later. It was a cold, overcast Monday morning in Chicago when a fleet of dark, unmarked vehicles pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Lincoln Park estate. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the gray dawn, casting harsh shadows across the manicured lawns. Harrison stood on the front porch, shivering in the morning air. He was holding a small canvas duffel bag, packed with a few necessities, exactly as Camille had instructed. He watched in numb paralysis as heavy car doors slammed shut and dozens of federal agents poured onto the property. They breached the heavy oak front doors with a specialized battering ram, shattering the grand entrance into splinters. The noise was deafening, echoing through the empty marble foyer where his mother had begged for mercy just 2 days prior. Harrison did not try to stop them. He stepped aside, clutching his small bag, leaning against the cold stone pillar. A few minutes later, the agents emerged from the house, leading Charles Davenport out into the freezing Chicago wind. The patriarch of the family, the man who had ruled his financial empire with an iron fist, looked incredibly small and fragile. He was not wearing his custom-tailored suits. He was wearing wrinkled pajamas and a pair of simple slippers. His hands were securely locked behind his back in heavy steel handcuffs. The cold metal glinted in the flashing police lights, a stark, undeniable symbol of his complete loss of power. Charles shuffled down the brick pathway, his head bowed, his face pale and sunken. He did not look at Harrison. He was entirely broken, silently accepting the devastating reality of his federal indictment. Dozens of local news vans and aggressive journalists had already gathered at the edge of the property line, pressing their camera lenses against the wrought iron gates to capture the perp walk. The bright flashes of their cameras illuminated the humiliating scene, broadcasting the ultimate downfall of the Davenport dynasty to the entire city. Reporters shouted questions over the howling wind, demanding to know where the missing millions had gone. Charles ignored them, keeping his chin tucked against his chest, as an agent guided his head down to clear the doorframe of the waiting federal vehicle. Catherine was nowhere to be seen, presumably hiding in her master bedroom, unable to face the blinding spotlight of their public disgrace. Harrison stood helpless on the curb, watching the heavy door slam shut, sealing his father inside. As the convoy of vehicles pulled away, driving down the quiet street, Harrison finally understood the absolute finality of his situation. He was not just broke, he was facing endless legal battles, potential accessory charges, and a lifetime of public infamy. He had traded a brilliant, loyal wife for a shallow, manipulative fraud, and he had traded his freedom to impress a father who was headed to a penitentiary. He had absolutely no money, no wife, no legacy, and no future. He was left standing alone in the bitter cold, staring at the shattered front doors of a house that the government would soon seize and auction off to the highest bidder. Thousands of miles away from the frantic media circus, an entirely different morning was unfolding. The sun was just beginning to rise over the lush green highlands of Edinburgh, Scotland, casting a warm golden glow across the rolling hills. Camille stepped out onto the massive stone balcony of her historic estate. The air was incredibly crisp and clean, carrying the faint, earthy scent of morning dew and pine needles. The heavy architecture of the castle-like home felt solid and protective beneath her feet, a beautiful contrast to the fragile house of cards she had left behind in Chicago. She wrapped a thick woven wool blanket tightly around her shoulders, holding a steaming ceramic mug of Earl Grey tea. She leaned against the ancient stone balustrade, taking a slow, deep breath. For the first time in 8 years, her lungs did not feel constricted by the heavy, suffocating weight of the Davenport expectations. Her chest was completely light. Below her in the sprawling manicured gardens, her 2 children were already awake and exploring their massive new territory. Leo was running across the damp grass wearing bright yellow rain boots chasing a small butterfly. He was not worried about scuffing expensive hardwood floors or keeping his voice down to appease an irritable grandfather. He was laughing loudly, his voice echoing freely across the open landscape. Sophie was trailing right behind him, holding her stuffed Highland cow tumbling into the soft grass and giggling with absolute pure joy. They were completely untethered from the toxic environment that had constantly tried to shrink them down to size. They were safe, they were wildly happy, and they were finally allowed to just be children. Camille watched them play, a profound sense of peace washing over her entire body. She had spent years quietly absorbing cruel insults from people who believed they were vastly superior to her. She had played the role of the compliant suburban wife, allowing them to vastly underestimate her intelligence and resolve. But in the end, her quiet observation had been her greatest weapon. She had used her brilliant mathematical mind to secure an independent, massive fortune, and used their own criminal arrogance to orchestrate their flawless downfall. She did not need to scream or fight for her freedom. She simply gathered the raw, undeniable facts and handed them over to the authorities, allowing the Davenports to completely destroy themselves. She took a sip of her hot tea, letting the comforting warmth spread through her chest. Her cell phone rested on a small wrought iron table near the balcony doors, completely silent. There were no frantic text messages, no demanding phone calls, and no desperate pleas for financial salvation. She had permanently severed the connection to her past life. A gentle breeze swept across the balcony, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the property. Leo stopped running and looked up at the balcony, spotting her standing there. He waved his small hand frantically, a massive, genuine smile lighting up his face. "Look at me, Mom," he shouted, his voice carrying perfectly through the crisp morning air. "I am going all the way to the trees." "Go explore, my brave boy," Camille called back, her voice steady and full of profound, unconditional love. Just please stay right where I can see you. Sophie quickly scrambled to her little feet and waved her favorite stuffed cow toward the balcony before playfully sprinting after her older brother. Camille watched them disappear behind a row of colorful blooming hydrangeas, feeling a deep, powerful surge of absolute triumph. She had walked through a blazing fire of betrayal and humiliation, but had not let the flames consume her. Instead, she used the heat to forge an unbreakable future for herself and her children. The toxic legacy of the Davenport family was a million miles away, locked behind federal prison bars and shattered bank accounts. She turned her face toward the rising sun, closing her eyes and letting the golden morning light warm her skin. The long, exhausting battle was now officially over forever. She had won her freedom, and as she listened to the sweet, distant sound of her children laughing in the highland breeze, she knew her new life was going to be absolutely beautiful. Looking back, my victory was never really about destroying the Davenports. They destroyed themselves the moment they confused cruelty with power and silence with weakness. My real victory was the morning I watched my children run freely across the Scottish grass, without fear, without shame, and without anyone telling them they were not enough. That was the life I had been fighting for all along. If you have ever been underestimated by people who were supposed to love you, remember this: you do not have to prove your worth to those committed to denying it. Build quietly. Protect your peace. Choose your moment. And when the door finally opens, walk through it without looking back. Have you ever had to walk away from people who only valued you when they could use you? Share your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe, and remember, you never have to burn yourself down to keep toxic people warm.